All right, looks like it's 2 o'clock. You know what that means. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Ready, Set, Rebound webinar broadcasting live from Brightspot HQ in Dallas, Texas. I'm Michael Pasterzi, the marketing manager here at Brightspot. Today, we'll take a look at 2 recent incentive trips, both domestic and international, that just got back, and what went into planning and running these programs in this environment of travel rebound fever. Let's see. Today, I am delighted to introduce Kim Fox, our Director of Meetings and Sim Travel, as well as our 2 globetrotting superstars, Hailey Jump and Christie Holland, who recently ran the programs. And we want to hear from you as well. Please submit your Q&A questions as we go along this presentation. We'd be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation as well as afterwards, just in case we run over, but please submit your questions. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Kim. Mute. Kim, we got mute.
Apologize, Michael, I thought you were going to unmute me. I'll do that next. Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to start off today by sharing some recent data. Many of our industry organizations are doing surveys and polls on a regular basis to track customer confidence as we begin this recovery. Those surveys and polls are indicating that more than 75% of Americans are ready to travel. 84% of those responders are actively planning summer vacations, and I know many of us here at Brightspot are in that number. Expected recovery is Q3 to Q4 of 21. Respondents plan to operate their first post-pandemic programs by the end of Q1 of 22. There is a pent-up demand for travel. We are hearing from many of our hotel partners that there is a lack of availability for hotel space due to this pent-up demand. Hotels are only willing to hold space for us for a very short period of time because the next person in line is ready to sign that contract. So booking sooner than later is very, very important. I was in a meeting yesterday and heard an incredible analogy that I have to share. Do you recall last year with the shortage of toilet paper? Everybody needed it and wanted it, but couldn't find it. Well, hotel rooms and space are going to be just like that. While it appears consumer confidence is definitely bouncing back, executive decision makers and companies are still showing a bit more caution. 94% of the executives remain supportive of incentive club trips. 77% of planners are predicting similar trips or moderate changes. The most important factors when planning for a future program are your contracts and risk management, being sure you've got a rock solid force majeure clause, and then destination selection. All of this aligns with what we are seeing with our clients here at Brightspot. I believe the accessibility of the vaccine, the lifting of the mask mandate, the significant decline in COVID cases is all great news for our industry as we begin to rebound. I was visiting with our air partner this week, and he said domestic flights are all coming back, but anything around January and later are not fully in the system yet. The biggest trend that he's seeing right now is the lack of availability, which mimics what we're hearing from our hoteliers. There are good fares and flights to resort destinations October through December, but many of those are already fully booked. The message here is if you plan on a trip for the fall and even spring, you need to start moving and move quickly. So moving on to SET, both Christie and Hailey have recently returned from operating incentive programs, and we want to share with you what their experience as planners has been as our industry begins to rebound and what the on-site experience was like for the attendees that traveled on these programs. Obviously, since COVID, there's many new precautions that we have to take into consideration as we begin planning. Our case studies today will feature both a domestic and an international destination. Hailey's group traveled from the US to Cancun, Mexico, and Christie's group stayed domestic and enjoyed a trip to Florida's Gulf Coast. Hailey, can you go ahead and share some information about your group and your pre-trip communications and registration process?
Yes, thanks, Kim. So as you mentioned, I recently took a US-based tech company to the beautiful Unico 2087 resort in Riviera Maya, Mexico. The group was about a 50-50 mix between male and female qualifiers between the ages of 30 and 50. So while registration was open, the CDC actually updated their testing guidelines, as we all know, that happened in January. So we had to quickly pivot and make sure that information was sent out an email regarding the current CDC requirements and testing protocols in place at Unico. So with the new CDC testing guidelines that were announced in January, the hotel was thankfully very quickly able to pivot and add on-site testing. So they provided 2 antigen tests per room at no cost to the attendee or the client. They also very quickly implemented a quarantine plan in the rare case that somebody did test positive during their trip. This quarantine included 14 days of no cost stay, along with access to the medical doctors, medication, or even hospitalization at no charge. So with all of this communication, our group was really well prepared once they arrived on site, and all of our expectations were properly set. We also made sure to communicate any pre-travel testing requirements, but in this case, no testing had to be done prior to arrival in Mexico.
And Christie, what about your group?
Perfect. Thanks, Kim. So my group was a US-based mortgage company. And like Kim said, we went to the Ritz-Carlton Naples in Naples, Florida, about a month ago. This group was well-traveled. They were age range from 30s to their 60s. And most traveled from the South, so specifically in Texas. And then we did have a few attendees come from Ohio, Kentucky, and Colorado. So the first important communication that we shared was during the registration process. So we had all attendees and their guests acknowledge a COVID-19 health declaration before they could complete the registration. So this really just detailed that if anyone that was traveling on the trip or anyone in their household had experienced any COVID-19 symptoms as outlined by the CDC at least 14 days prior to traveling on the trip, that they would notify both us at Brightspot and the client and would not be allowed to travel on the program. And then another important step we took was in the pre-trip documents, which we sent out about 2 weeks prior to the program. We did include a COVID-19 flyer in that pre-trip, and it basically just outlined all the protocols and precautions that were in place for both the state of Florida as well as the hotel, the Ritz-Carlton. So just provided clear expectations on what policies and procedures they could expect when they were traveling.
Thank you, Christie. I think one of the most important things that we need to do is to clearly communicate to our clients and their attendees the steps that we're all taking to ensure that they are safe. One of our processes at Brightspot is a hotel and DMC assessment. We require our vendors to complete this and return it. Last year, we added some COVID-specific questions to this document, so we have a full understanding of what our vendors are doing to ensure the health and safety of our groups. Hailey, why don't you tell us about your assessment?
Sure. So as a part of our hotel emergency assessment, specifically relating to COVID, we asked Unico what company policies had been updated because of COVID and what preventative measures were being taken. So the current sanitization protocols are very stringent with their newly implemented SAFE protocols. And some examples of things that had been implemented were extra sanitization of rooms before check-in. And this included adding a door hanger on each door, letting guests know that it had gone through those extra steps. Hand sanitizer was also placed throughout all public spaces, especially at entrances to restaurants, stores, elevators, in shops and such. All staff were masked as well. And they also had reminder signs posted throughout public indoor areas, reminding guests that masks were to be worn inside. They also provide a one-on-one check-in experience for all guests. So that helped prevent standing in line or in large groups, which promoted social distancing. As for food and beverage, the biggest change for our group was switching the welcome reception from stations to tray pass canapes because no self-service of any type was allowed on property at Unico. So when planning with our DMC partner, IVI DMC, I also asked them to provide a copy of their sanitization and cleaning practices for their vehicles. One of the biggest things they are doing there is extra sanitization in all vehicles. So that means spraying shoes, hands, and luggage before loading into vehicles. And they also suggested smaller groups and transfers for arrivals, departures, and activities. Christie, what were your findings?
Yeah, so the Ritz-Carlton obviously follows the Marriott commitment to clean protocols that were quickly put into place when the pandemic started. So some of those items included obviously the hotel service areas being treated with hospital grade disinfectants and done frequently. Signage was placed throughout the hotel as well to remind guests to maintain social distancing and limit capacities on the elevators. Sanitizing stations were placed throughout the hotel. and then more frequent sanitizations between stays in the guest rooms. And then they added the front desk partitions between the front desk staff and the guests as they were checking in. It was also important for us to find out what the hotel's plan was should someone test positive on site. So questions we asked during the assessment were, do the guests need to remain in their guest room if they start noticing symptoms, or do they need to be escorted to a quarantine area? If they do stay on site, how are those services handled? So for the Ritz-Carlton specifically, their policy was guests would stay in their guest room, and then all requests would be made through the hotel operator. They would not do any cleaning or housekeeping services. So all arrangements for linens, food, and supplies would be left outside their door. And then they would provide extra trash bags so they could put those items in there when they left. And then if a guest did want to leave the property and not stay on site, they would have to contact hotel management, and they had a plan in place for that. And then lastly, during our DMC assessment, we did confirm that our DMC that we used did not automatically group passengers with social distancing in mind for all airport transfers. So they did make suggestions. However, it was Brightspot's ultimate decision as well as our clients. So for this particular trip, we did implement social distancing for each type of vehicle that we used. Kim, you're on mute.
I apologize, I was muting myself again. I'm laughing because Christie and I both came into the office today to avoid barking dogs, but what we didn't take into account is that it's obviously lawn mowing day around the office. And so I apologize if there's background noise with mowers and blowers. We'll try to overcome that. Yes, these two properties, I think, were a great example of what we are seeing across the board with all the major hotel brands coming forward, really mid-year last year, just showing their safety and sanitation guidelines. They all realize that that is really critical piece to getting business back. Moving on to slide, let's talk about Rebound. We're going to now talk about what the on-site experience was like for the attendees on both of these trips. Christie, we're going to start with you this time.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So starting with air travel, as we all know, masks at the airport and on the plane are mandatory. So when attendees did arrive to the Fort Myers airport, they did have a DMC staff person greet them. All DMC staff and drivers were required to wear masks and conduct temperature checks prior to the start of each shift. So the DMC staff, when they greeted each attendee, they did offer sanitizing wipes upon arrival for their luggage and luggage handles, and this was a standard protocol. And then for our group, we actually added small hand sanitizer bottles for each attendee as they were entering into the vehicle for a very small additional cost. And then in addition to that, we do know that each of the vehicles were thoroughly sanitized before and after each transfer. And then as they arrived to the Ritz-Carlton Naples, they were escorted to the front desk, which, as I mentioned earlier, did have plexiglass barriers between the front desk staff and the guests as they were checking in. The hotel did offer no contact check-in through the Marriott Bonvoy app. However, our attendees did have to provide a credit card down for incidentals. So we were unable to utilize that service, but it is something to keep in mind to help with less contact when you're on site. And then for hotel staff, they were required to wear masks during their shift, and temperature checks were given. And actually, housekeeping services did stay the same at this property. However, each guest, when they were checked in, were allowed to opt out of that service if they did not want anyone entering their guest room during their stay. And then when you entered your room after you checked in, you did notice high-touch items like the TV remote that was sanitized and bagged as a precaution. And then just a few things I noticed around the hotel, just a few hotel activities. So for example, the fitness spa and center. The fitness center was open. However, you did have to reserve a time slot, and you must check in and check out when you were entering and leaving. And then obviously masks were required when you were in the fitness center. And then the spa, this was open. Everyone did have to wear masks. They did separate the appointment times a little bit farther apart than they used to. And that's just so they could help sanitize the rooms in between treatments. And then another thing we noticed, so restaurants and outlets on property. So we did have 5 restaurants on property, and their hours were actually based upon hotel occupancy. So a few days before we arrived, we did receive an updated hours report, and we printed that and kept that at the hospitality desk. But it is important to ask those questions as we start to plan, because some of these hotels that we're traveling to aren't going to be up to the level of capacity that they were at prior to COVID. But overall on site, we had fantastic feedback, and it was a great experience. So Hailey, what about you? Did you have any differences being international?
So we saw a lot of the same things. I think there were a few differences. So the Cancun airport obviously requires masks, and a big difference here is they perform a thermal body scan on all arrivals before they enter baggage claim. So really checking everybody's temperature as they're entering basically into the country. And then upon departure, everyone did have to present their negative COVID test along with a Mexico health questionnaire before checking in for their flights home. So after departing the airport, the DMC greeted everyone with another temperature check and before boarding the vehicles. And then they also, like I mentioned before, sprayed the sanitizing solution on vehicle or on the shoes and luggage before being boarded. And of course, the DMC staff were all masked at all times. So upon arrival at the hotel, shoes and bags were once again sanitized by the Unico staff. And they also had a temperature scanner at the main entrance, taking attendees' temperatures quickly and less invasively than stopping each person one off to take with a handheld thermometer. And all hotel staff was also masked here, including housekeeping and maintenance staff. So much like Christie experienced, maid service was every day, but attendees could request no housekeeping upon check-in. Each door, like I mentioned, did have a paper door hanger notifying the guests that the room had been sanitized prior to check-in, and all housekeeping staff wore their gloves and masks during service. We also had a similar experience in the spa and fitness center. So appointments had to be made for the fitness center, and spa appointments were spaced further apart to allow for additional sanitization and social distancing. Thankfully, the hotel restaurants were all open at Unico. They had moved every restaurant to an a la carte type serving, and they also extended some of the restaurant hours, such as opening one of the dinner restaurants for breakfast as well, to allow for more social distancing. They also provided all menus through the hotel app or QR codes. So I think the big difference here is the COVID testing for international programs. So Unico made this process very easy. Appointments were scheduled and assigned at check-in, and testing took place in meeting space on property. They did place signage throughout this area, noting that it was a COVID testing zone. At their assigned time, an attendant would check the passport against appointment name, and then the test was performed in a highly sanitized area with a lab tech wearing full PPE. And results were actually delivered the same day, so there was not a lot of anxiousness. You got them within a few hours. And the best news of all, our entire group tested negative, so we all got to come back home. Another thing to note, at Brightspot, we're ensuring to stay up to date on all the most recent CDC requirements, which, as most of you know, are ever changing. So for example, the CDC just announced that self-test or at-home test could be used to fulfill the testing requirement for international travel. So this could be a great solution for those countries that don't provide on-site testing or where lab access is hard to come by.
Thanks, Hailey. One thing we are finding with our hotel partners and some of the international destinations is that they really are getting set up to make this COVID testing as easy and seamless as possible, not wanting to disrupt an individual's day. You don't want to go stand in line for 3 hours, have to be tested for COVID when you're on vacation. So really happy to see that many of the hoteliers are working on making that a seamless process. Another thing as planners, I think we really need to be mindful of, Christie touched on this, is to show patience with our hotel and DMC partners. Many of them are still not at 100% capacity and therefore have not brought back all of their staff. I was listening in on the Site Texas Tech Summit last week, and they had a great panel discussion, and this was brought up. They're all eager and ready to be back, but until the business is there to justify it, they will still be operating with limited staff. So we just need to show some grace there and give them, be prepared that it could take a little longer for them to respond, and be patient with that. Let's move on to on-site events and talk specifically about the actual events that they had and activities. Hailey, why don't you start off on this topic?
Sure, yeah. So we held a welcome dinner and farewell dinner on site. For the welcome, we incorporated tray pass canapes, and the servers actually took drink orders instead of bar self-service. So this helped social distance and helped from a group gathering at the bar. We also provided branded masks at this event so that they could be used throughout the week. Our farewell dinner was held in a restaurant on site, and attendees ordered a la carte as opposed to doing a group buffet. So we also held a private group dinner in a cavern in Rio Secreto, which is awesome. I highly recommend it to anyone that can do it. The dinner was plated here, and all servers and bartenders wore masks and gloves, and hand sanitizer was readily available, even all the way down deep in the cave. So for our catamaran sail, which was our group activity, we transferred the group in a motor coach to allow for social distancing. And the catamaran capacity was also double what our group size was to ensure everyone had room to distance if needed. Lunch on the catamaran was individually plated and all equipment was thoroughly sanitized. So, Christie, what were you seeing in regards to activities for your program?
Yeah, so mine was actually a little bit slightly different. So we only had one evening event, which was the welcome reception and dinner. And this was located on the beach at the resort. So when setting up, we considered social distancing. This hotel did have 72-inch rounds, so we set a max of 6 per table. And then we actually did have buffet service. However, it was served by the hotel, so we had attendance. So just something to keep in mind when planning. There was a little bit of additional charge because of this, because we had additional attendance for the dinner. And then instead of any big group activity or planned individual activities for this club trip, the client actually provided a room credit to everybody that they could use throughout the hotel as they wished. So our hotel had many options. Obviously, we had the spa. There was the Ritz-Carlton sister resort, which had a golf course. And then we had water activities on site as well. So I think we're going to see a trend of group activities move to more of individual activities. And I'm sure it will stick around for a little bit until we, start losing these social distancing protocols.
Thank you, Christie. I think one thing here that, as I hear you guys speak is really it doesn't sound like the guest experience changed drastically. The steps that we have to take, there's definitely a change there, but overall the guest experience is not drastically different for them. I don't think it doesn't sound like any of them were, their days were disrupted. As far as activities at leisure, I know as planners, we all agree, we hear that all the time. People want more time to just do what they want to do instead of being, on forced activities. So all that's good stuff. So moving on to attendee survey results. For both groups, we did include some specific questions in the post-trip survey, asking the attendees if they felt appropriate measures had been taken to make them feel safe. Hailey, I'll let you start out with sharing your findings.
Sure. So specifically speaking about, health and safety. So 90% of our guests rated this excellent, and 100% of the guests said that COVID testing was excellent, which I think speaks to the preparation and organization at Unico. And then also just speaking on overall guest experience, I would agree, Kim. The overall survey results were all excellent when it came to guest experience and on-site events and activities. So I agree, there's a lot that goes into the planning in the upfront, but that's, trying to maximize the guest experience once they're there.
Yeah, and we had very similar findings. We also added questions into our post-event survey about health and safety for both the hotel and transportation, and 100% were either extremely satisfied or satisfied with the precautions that we took in place. So overall, I think attendees are very eager to travel, so we're excited to see that trend keep moving forward.
Yep, I agree. And as I just said, I think both these groups surveys showed that attendees were comfortable traveling. They appreciate the extra steps that we took to ensure their safety. So in summary, we feel like travel is rebounding. At Brightspot, our fall calendar has filled up, and spring of 22 is looking like it's back to normal, maybe even better than normal, because the group sizes are definitely increasing larger, basically to accommodate winners for 21 and 22. Again, there's definitely some extra steps that we're taking as planners in this post-COVID world, but I do think that those steps will really become the norm moving forward. They're all to ensure safety. We're working closely with our valued partners to ensure the health and safety of our clients and their attendees, and we're keeping on top of all restrictions and CDC guidelines, keeping our clients informed. Basically, we feel people are ready to travel, and we're ready too. I know Hailey and Christie all said it was great getting on a plane again, so I know the rest of my team is anxious to get on a plane and travel on their next program.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We'll go straight into the Q&A segment. I know we already have a couple questions on the board right now, but please feel free to submit your Q&A question whenever you feel like it. Let's see, we'll go right into it. And a quick promo before we start answering these questions. We have 2 great resources on our site. This Tips to Improve resource really helps any incentive travel program looking to add a little bit more bright ideas, and as well as the best USA destinations, we believe, for the domestic incentive travel rebound. These are great starting locations when international travel is starting to, getting its footing a little bit more. We're going to see the restrictions come down soon, but in the meantime, USA is a great choice. So let's go right into the Q&A. And first up, we have a question from Shauna. Are we finding these testing requirements are changing as attendees are fully vaccinated, or is it still standard protocol?
I can take that. So right now it's still standard protocol, but I will say the caveat to that is they are changing daily. I mean, if you read the news, you'll see daily that there's countries opening up, wanting to open in the summer for vaccinated travelers. There's a lot of talk around vaccine passports, but I think as we continue to move to herd immunity, these testing protocols will probably change. Kim, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We do have a couple clients that we're working with for fall programs that they're still trying to work through how they're going to do this, where they are going to require their winners to be vaccinated in order to travel. That's kind of a touchy subject. Not everybody wants a vaccine. So they're obviously still working through how they would manage that. But I think we'll get to the point where we're not going to be needing to have a test before coming into the USA. I think the vaccine passport might be the key to that. And it may be that either you are vaccinated or you show proof of a negative test.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing a lot in the news. The headlines will say EU opening to vaccinated travelers, and then you dig deep and it says, or presenting a negative test upon entry. So I agree.
Right.
Awesome. And another one, I'm curious, if someone tested positive for COVID, was it made clear who would pick up the tab for the additional hotel stays and change of flight, i.e. the employer, the company putting on the event, the individual, etc.?
I think, Hailey, you might have some feedback on that. I know I'll talk on one because we're working with it. Some of these hotels, I know one trip that we're doing that they have a $30 per person fee. And I think it's got to be the entire group. You can't pick and choose if you're doing this or not, the entire group. And that $30, it's like an insurance basically. And if you purchase that insurance and someone tests positive, they are completely covered for the healthcare as well as their hotel stay. And to me, $30 per attendee is really minimal on a program budget. And to me, I would think that would be very well worth it.
Yeah, so I think that's a super important question to ask during planning. We're seeing a lot of hotels pick up that tab for those rooms, especially in Mexico. We're seeing that a lot. So for example, Unico was willing to offer 14 days at no additional charge for quarantine, and that includes, meals and everything. And then we did discuss internally with my client, if somebody does test positive, they would have picked up the flight change, so.
And we had the similar conversation with our client, but I do know our hotel obviously did not offer the 14 days for free as Unico did, but they did offer a discount. So it's definitely questions to keep in mind when you're planning.
Yeah, I think to me, I don't know, domestic, I think is a little different. International, I mean, hopefully everybody has health insurance and that would cover you here, but getting sick internationally would be a scary thing. So I could see that domestic hotels would not be as willing to offer that.
Yeah, great insight. How many estimated hours of additional work do you think your team put into the additional safety precautions?
Well, I can start with that, and then I'm sure Haley's is probably a little bit more hours just because they had to do the COVID testing. But honestly, for us, I would definitely say there's obviously a little bit more hours involved just doing the research. But as a standard, we do have a document that we provide always to both the hotel and DMC partners when we're planning. So really what we did is we pivoted and added more COVID questions that we just collect prior. And then as far as the work is, concerned with the clients, a few additional hours just to get everything squared away. But I'm sure, Hailey, you have more hours since you had to do the testing. So
Yeah, honestly, I think that our hotel and DMC assessments really set us up for success in the front. So those are automatically sent out and we collect all of that information. And along with that, we also ask for any other documentation that the hotel may have on their protocols. I'd say maybe a 10% increase in hours for me, just in general on, really the communication piece back and forth with attendees and kind of answering those questions, because there were some concerns at first. But I think we set ourselves up for success in the long run with all of our processes in place here at Brightspot. So it wasn't significant, thankfully.
All right, great. We have another question from Kevin, and I know we're just over the 2:30 mark, so feel free, and we'll send out recordings afterwards to everybody. So, but if you have questions, keep sending them in. Do you restrict qualifiers based on the guest numbers allowed for this trip, or is it not relevant?
I can mention.
I think the question is I want to clarify this. Kevin, are you speaking? I'm assuming that you're speaking of if a qualifier, am I allowed to bring a guest or not because of this? And I don't think we had anybody that they were still allowed to bring guests. That did not play into it at all.
Yeah, and the group size, we really just manage that at the hotel level. So making sure that we had more room in the meeting space or a bigger outside area to accommodate the same number of guests and qualifiers, but giving them more room to socially distance.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
So we have another question here. Did you see participation numbers change from previous years?
yeah, I can actually take that one. So for this client, we actually doubled in size compared to 2019. So a super positive, outcome for us for this trip. Hailey, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so this group that I took to Mexico, they're always a bit on the smaller side. It's one of my smaller groups, but we really didn't see a significant change from our previous year's group sizes.
Great. And were resort activities affected by COVID protocols?
Sure, I can take this. So I think this is great, relying on our partners. So Unico found really creative ways to still incorporate daily activities for guests, which I know a lot of the guests love. Like that's something to look forward to at these big resorts. So they offered socially distant pool activities like water aerobics or pool spin class. They did like one-on-one mixology classes or individual wine and paint classes. So they got creative to make sure that there was still a robust offering.
And we saw the same outcome at the Ritz-Carlton Naples. They still had daily activities, a lot of them being outside to help with social distancing, but they were still able to find ways to continue to offer those kind of activities for guests.
Great. Let's see, a couple more. Were offsite activity choices limited?
So I did run into this a little bit. So some activity providers like deep sea fishing charters were no longer in business due to COVID, which is, you hate to see that. We really relied on our DMC partner to provide alternative options that would provide the same level of service and great experience that we expect for our President's Trip Club. So I think that once again goes back to relying on your partners and the destinations to really help navigate those challenges.
Great. And last one, I think, how are we dealing with closed borders?
So I think the biggest thing that we're doing right now is asking clients to wait until 90 days out before making a decision. I don't know, Kim, if you have any more insight on that. You're on mute. Kim.
I'm sorry. Good Lord. Yes, Hailey, you're right on. I mean, that's basically what we're trying to tell, clients is don't make quick decisions right now. In some of these cases, we're 6 months out, and I believe things are changing daily and hopefully are only going to get better as time passes. So I would not rush to cancel or reschedule. I would wait till probably 90 days out.
And I will say a bright spot in all of this is I think Christie and I both have programs that have contracted in Europe for spring of 2022. So I have a group going to Switzerland in April, and Christie, I think you mentioned you did too, right?
Yeah, in June, actually, I have, they're going to Monaco. So all good signs.
Yeah.
And let's see, we got one more at the buzzer. We've all seen this happen, but how do you handle anyone that was unwilling to play by the COVID safety protocols?
Well, we can kindly suggest that they play along. I don't think we rule with an iron fist, but I think you can also pull the client in to help push those protocols since they are, attendees of the client's program. So, just friendly reminders if you see somebody not playing by the rules.
All right. Good to know. Well, I would like to thank Kim, Hailey, and Christie for sharing their expert insight today. This has been an awesome webinar, and I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Please stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more webinars down the pipe, especially focused on the rebound of travel and meetings. So keep your eyes on our LinkedIn, keep your eyes on those emails. We'll be in touch shortly. As always, feel free to check out our website. Drop us a line. We're happy to help with any planning needs you have. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.